All right, everyone, welcome to your weekly edition of Liberty Lens. I am your host, Big John, joined as always by my friend and co host, Mr. Mike Termat, looking dapper. Usually he has a dark suit on, folks, but this I think just brings out his personality a little more, a little brighter, a little bit lighter. How you feeling today, Mike?
I feel great, but that's none of that is the reason why I'm wearing this jacket. I'm wearing this jacket in effort to try to match the stupid graphic that your team has been using to promote the show. I accidentally wore this jacket. My
Yeah.
team hates this jacket, by the way. I
Okay.
wore this jacket someday when I was with you on some show, and you took that picture and you've been using it to promote Liberty Lens, which is fine. I don't really care. But it did occur to me that I should at some point try to match your graphic.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Always thinking ahead that marketing step. But hey, tell the team, send me a picture in which you are even more handsome than you are now. And I will
No,
be
it
more than
only goes downhill chronologically. The high water mark was in the 80s.
yeah, there you go. Same here. Same here, brother. Same here. All right. Let's talk about something that I think has been on both our minds recently. And that is like we've often spoken, Mike, about guardrails. Now, and the concept of guardrails, whether they're constitutional guardrails, societal guardrails, in terms of how we behave and interact with each other, less so perhaps in a legal sense, but like you and I will always reminisce for the days of what happened when polar opposites politically, like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, could argue back and forth, and then once the session was done, head down to a tavern in DC, have a beer, and hash out their remaining differences in a civil manner. And that's always used as the example, right, Mike, of how
Well,
this should work, right?
before the 1980s, I think it was Adams and Jefferson, but you're right. These more modern examples are easier to relate to, and there
Yeah.
have been other examples, but nowadays, oof, just the idea of being able to understand your political opponents, right,
Yes.
is viewed as a negative. Personally, and I think I speak for you and me both,
Right.
you and I would view with diminished respect someone who feigned an inability to describe both sides of any argument.
Yes. Yes.
If you can't describe what it is that your political opponent is all pissy about,
Right.
like what's wrong with you? You and I would consider that to be either just abject low IQ or a political stubbornness that would make you beneath being worthy of debate.
Sure.
But in Washington, if you describe with any, never mind sympathy, with any understanding whatsoever of what it is that your political opponents are upset about, it would be considered something that would erode your political standing in your own party.
Agreed, agreed. And it's interesting because you were talking and being an old Trekkie, a good old Star Trek nerd, original series, of course.
Of
Um,
course.
there was one line where there was Mr. Spock was doing exactly that. He was explaining the side of this culture they had found that was constantly warring with each other. And he says, so after he explained the position of the two sides, one of the prime ministers on the planet gets up and goes, see, even a logical being like Mr. Spock agrees with our position. And he very calmly says, Prime Minister, I said I understood your position. I did not say I agree with your position. Very
That's
coldly.
exactly right. And
That
today, if you were to describe and say you agreed, people would attach that to some sort of,
he supports it.
sympathetic support. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I wanted to frame this episode around, Mike, is exactly that. Like, when does dissent remain dissent? And when does it sort of devolve into what the administration is saying about a lot of its political opponents? Meaning, when does it dissolve into domestic terrorism? When does it devolve into um, evil, describing the other side as evil instead of wrong, which has always been a sticking point with me. Someone can be wrong without being evil and having uh, malicious intent. So
I
let's
do it
start.
all the time.
Right. It's easy to do, right? So let's sort of back up a little bit because a lot of what there's been a lot in the news about the White House, perhaps the president personally, or an extension of the president's personal feelings, having sort of a political enemies list. I think that phrase came into, if you're old enough, kids, it would have come around the time of Watergate is when we became aware of it, with Nixon's enemies list and things of that nature, right? It was Nixon, right? It wasn't LBJ, but
No, it
regardless,
was Nixon. LBJ had a list too, but he was, smart enough not to articulate it or write it down.
I was going to say LBJ
Where did
was
he hide it, by the way? That's worth a podcast.
yeah,
By the way, have you ever listened to, apologies to your
yeah,
audience for this sidebar.
sure.
Have you ever listened to the LBJ audio tapes?
Oh, of course. He recorded everything.
He recorded everything, and a lot of youngsters believe that it was Nixon who started recording things. No, Nixon started recording things because he was ironically paranoid and created audio tapes, that hung himself, politically speaking, not
Right.
literally. But LBJ recorded everything because he was a control freak, and he
Yes.
wanted to make sure everyone did what the hell he told them to do. The number of phone calls that ended with click is remarkable. There weren't a lot of,
Right.
have a nice day, say hey to Susie Q, your wife. It was just
Right.
do what I tell you to do. You got it? Yes, Mr. Click.
Right.
That's a guy who not only bossed people around on his team, but made no bones about which side of the line you were on if he was against you.
Yeah, and here's something we want to touch on very briefly, since we've kind of, your tangent is a great segue into some of the stuff we want to talk about. So let's talk about this. A couple of weeks ago, this struck me, Mike. We were talking about this as very strange, which was the Truth Social that President Trump put out that was directed at Attorney General Pam Bondi. And I'm paraphrasing here, but I don't think I'm too far off from the sentiment. See if you agree with me, which was, hey, how come my political enemies aren't arrested? Why haven't they been indicted yet? Let's get moving on these indictments, because apparently the lack of indictable offenses was not forthcoming, even for someone like Bondi,
Yep.
even for someone like Patel. And the president's patience was wearing thin, and he said, "Let's go get them." Now, I personally think that was never intended to be public. That somehow
Yep.
a signal chat or an email somehow made it to his Truth Social, and that got public. But
Yep.
it may have served the purpose that it energized his base, saying, "Yeah, where are these arrests?"
Yep.
So, Mike, talk to me about that on two
Yep.
levels. One, the actual communication, and two, the what does it mean for this environment that we're in, that there's a president, much to your point, like LBJ or Nixon, that has a list of people that he wants to see prosecuted for apparent political reasons, not
I think
criminal
you put
reasons.
your finger right on something that's really fascinating. By the way, I don't think you and I agreed to spend the entire podcast on this Pam Bondi communication, but we certainly could.
We
It
could, yeah.
revealed so much, including, and I've already said this to you once, if you or I had sent such a message to each other, I would expect there'd be a phone call forthcoming. Are you okay? Like,
Right.
why do you speak to me in such tones? I mean, do we
Right,
not know each other? Right? The
right,
fact that you're not 100% that no one is 100% certain about whether that message was supposed to be a DM or a post, right? The fact that it's not clear and something about which we would all be 100% certain suggests that they have a weird communication style, a weird relationship. I'm pretty sure that if I accidentally posted for public view something that was meant to be a DM to anybody, it would be obvious and readily apparent. Would you agree with that?
I would agree, and I would go one step further and say it wouldn't be up for very long.
Well, and I mean, if I said, John, great show, but your best color is beige, not blue,
Right,
and I accidentally posted that, I might say, oops, that was meant for John direct, but it's still true, right?
right, and it's okay.
And it's okay.
Right,
But this suggests a really weird style. And and the reason it's important is not just for stylistic purposes. but they do not have the type of relationship that invites feedback.
Mm,
And remember when her predecessor, Barr, was dismissed by the president in Trump 45 days.
right.
It was because Barr had attempted a consultative type of discussion, which included, not ironically, whether or not to prosecute Comey. And the AG's office decided they were not going to, right? Not
Right.
everything had come to light. It's not a complete apple and apple. It's, I realize we're up to 3 apples now, not 1. So I don't mean to say, we should put our head in the sand here. But it was a related conversation, and I'm not sure that Barr wasn't surprised when Trump immediately jumped on the idea of, "Yeah, you should resign." I think that, you know, Barr, if he grew up the way most attorneys and most business people do in the United States, when you have a consultation with your boss and you don't see eye to eye, it should be a throwaway line to say, if you've lost confidence in me and want me to go, just say so. I think you expect your boss to say, no, 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 it's not like that. We're having an argument. Maybe we're having a fight. Maybe we don't see eye to eye, but that doesn't mean I don't respect your opinion. That's what,
Right.
99 times out of 100, that's what you expect your boss to say. And Trump didn't. Trump was like, good idea. Ciao, ciao. And that was, I think, an odd thing that revealed something about the nature of these relationships. And by the way, we see them in the cabinet meetings as well.
Right.
If you or I spoke to each other, if anyone out there listening to us today, watching us today, imagine any relationship you have in which you and a friend, a coworker, even a boss, even someone who reports to you, spoke to each other the way that people speak to each other in those cabinet meetings, the way that the cabinet level secretaries speak to their boss, the president of the United States. If you had any conversation, anything like that, I would expect someone to say, "You're kidding me right now, right? Like, why are you talking to me this way? Your check is going to clear. Don't worry about it.
Right.
Settle the hell down. Is this because the cameras are on? Because if that's, Bob, if you're speaking this way because the cameras are on, we need to turn the cameras off."
Right.
And that's the way that they typically are. Before Trump, the cabinet meetings were, a photo op, still photos typically only. You ran 60 seconds of video maybe in recent times for the
Right.
social media. Then
Some
you turned
B-roll.
off the cameras and you had your damn conversation. You don't leave them running so that everyone sounds like an idiot sucking up to their boss. Well, that appears to be the style of relationship he has with Bondi,
Right.
including discussing specific matters. And the reason that this strikes me as so important and frankly so weird is because in this matter, this particular subject line, like who to prosecute,
Right.
right? Traditionally, a president and an attorney general don't discuss them at all,
Right.
much less via a directive. Most White Houses would be extremely careful not even to say, how's your thinking lately on prosecuting X, Y, and Z, right? They wouldn't even go that far to ask the
Right.
question because they want an arm's length plausible deniability to be able to say, I wasn't even briefed. I had no idea.
Right.
She's on her own. She decided this and she didn't get any political pressure from me. We didn't even discuss it. That's how most White Houses wanted, almost all White Houses want to
Right.
handle this. And, we all realize that that was probably not the case with Bobby Kennedy, but certainly since then, remember Bill Clinton got in trouble for having a conversation with the attorney general because they were afraid that there would be a case that was only tangential to Bill Clinton, right? It had to do with Hillary. And look, today, now the president doesn't seem to think it's a problem at all to take a giant bite of the apple in terms of pressuring his attorney general, and to do so in a way that leaves you uncertain, even the nature of the communication.
And you're right. There's certainly legal and ethical reasons why you wouldn't want that communication. And certainly, even if we were argue that they may have that conversation in a skiff somewhere, or like even in the Oval Office with no cameras, you know, you would at least say, well, this shouldn't be public. We should avoid the appearance of impropriety, right? And just leave it at that.
Even if we were improper, let's avoid the appearance of impropriety.
Sure,
Let's not be stupid and unethical.
right. One or the other, but not both, right? But so this also highlights a lot of the other things, because you could see sort of like this mentality starting at the top and radiating outward, right? So one of the things is that uh, the administration and the political movement it represents, let's call it MAGA for now, um, they want to seize back the culture that they feel was stolen by the left, by the quote woke. And to some extent, they may have an argument, I think a credible one, that most of the rank and file in this country were not comfortable with a lot of the far left proclamations in terms of culture, in terms of society, whether that be the raft of pronouns we should all be aware of, the what I'll generally bucket under DEI and the way it's referred to, right? So there is sort of like a political gold mine there to say, let's just bring it back, man. Let's leave that for the 0.5% that care about it. We're not going to institutionalize it. We have to get back our schools. But where does that now shift away, Mike? This is, I guess, the thrust of the episode was, where does that shift? When does that shift rather become the same wokeism, but from the right? Meaning, like, I think you and I could agree, let's free up the universities to actually be places where students can go to learn, to explore, to have their minds expanded and not indoctrinated. I think we could all agree on that. But does it cross the line if the administration says, and we're putting in essentially content officers that are responsible for places that get federal money, like Harvard, like Yale, whoever else is on our hit list, to make sure that they are teaching the correct history, the correct science, the correct political science courses, right?
Yeah.
When does that become a tipping point again?
Well, it has. And I think that it's for us to recognize that these things go back and forth cyclically, not merely back and forth until someone decides enough is enough.
Right.
Clearly we're not seeing that. The president's attitude toward these things is a direct reflection of his response and his supporters' response to the Biden administration, to the Obama administration, themselves reactions to the Bush administrations, all three of them,
Right.
and the Reagan administration. These things go back and forth. There's no question about that, which brings up, I think, an interesting phenomenon. You can't have half a Trump, right?
Right.
He was elected because so many folks, myself included, were pissed off about all the weird stuff going on the left. And he was the one guy who would say so the way he did.
Right.
Right? I don't think anyone would argue it was a choice between Trump or any one of a number of other guys or gals who spoke as forcefully as he did about how stupid the left was. If you thought the left was stupid, Trump was your guy.
Right.
Just was, right? Because he was willing to say things no one else is willing to say, including a lot of things that we totally agree with,
Right.
including a handful of things he shouldn't have said.
Right.
By the way, even if you do agree with him, a handful of things he shouldn't have said, right?
Well, it's
Right?
sort of a case of only Nixon could go to China, right? Only Trump could have said those things.
Only Trump could have said those things, having been a Democrat a long time ago, not having been a long-term Republican himself, being a blue-collar billionaire, a guy who can operate heavy equipment and made $4 billion pressuring other people into doing so at a discount. There is something about that guy that is endearing if you are pissed off. Okay,
Right.
so he's your guy. Okay, now you get that guy into office and you say, whoa, we need constraint. Well, I'm sorry, you don't get half a Trump, right? He's your guy because he articulated no restraint. He did not suggest, well, sometimes the First Amendment has to be honored, and we need to be careful about what we say because institutionally, we've come a long way, baby, and we don't want to go too far and irritate the other side until we get into some cyclical back and forth. That's not for us. We're America. That's not your guy, right?
Right. Right.
That's not what he said. So many Americans have been so disappointed, you and I included,
Sure.
have been so disappointed by the institutionalization of silliness, the the growth of these institutions beyond what the American populace was comfortable with, whether you consider that to be the civil service blob or the Federal Reserve System and financial services regulation, whether you consider that to be all of the silly data and research manipulation in health research and health services and HHS and all of the research biases, the money, all of which was manifested in the COVID days so horrifically. Example after example after deference to the United Nations. Oh my goodness. Example after example after example of these institutions with which American people are fed up. Okay.
Right.
Along comes a guy and says, you know what? I don't give a rat's ass about these institutions. They all stink. Everyone's like, oh my God, finally someone gets it. Okay. He's in office now, and now you say, well, the institution of how the relationship between the White House and the Department of Justice has been is something that we want to preserve. I'm sorry, that's too let that ship sail.
Right. Right.
And it is for us to raise these issues. I'm not suggesting that this relationship between the White House and the Department of Justice is a good idea. I don't think it is. I think it's a really bad idea.
Right.
But it is an idea that we helped we helped inaugurate. We helped bring this we brought this in, and it's one of the reasons why I have for a long time said we need to get rid of the FBI. I think it should be broken up and dispersed into various other agencies, including state police departments and the Department of Defense. And I think that we should structurally handle the Department of Justice differently. If we don't like the politicization of the prosecutorial function, which we don't, it's just something that we need to be much, much more careful about, and not beginning with Trump, but beginning
Sure.
a generation ago, then we need to peel the Department of Justice outside of the unified executive.
Well, I agree with you, and I think what you made a good point that if you got Trump, like of it or not now, like it, accept or don't accept the unintended consequences of supporting President Trump. This is where we are now, and to what we touched on at the opening, this is where you and I thought there were guardrails, right? And guardrails are a funny concept because I think all of us, to some extent, unless you're like a total anarchist, right? Um, most of us will accept that guardrails to some extent should exist. Now, of course, how they're built, how they're maintained, how far they extend is open to debate, right? But for example, I've always thought that one guardrail we should have, to your point, very simple. I'm not going to frame it institutionally, Mike, because I'm not there like you are. But for example, the president shouldn't be able to pick and choose US attorneys based on simply if he hates the person they're trying to prosecute or indict. right? Like, to me, that would be a guardrail. Like, hey, we haven't found any evidence on person X to indict them. Okay, you're fired. Anybody who's willing to indict this person, raise your hand. I couldn't care less what kind of experience you have. Oh, okay, that's my right as president. I'll do that. And as funny as I just framed it, Mike, we've seen these examples in this administration. Not forget 45. I'm saying here in 47. We've seen it with Alina Habas. We've seen it with I forget the gentleman's name, but it was a Republican U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, which handles all the, I will term them federal political cases, things like
Yep.
espionage, federal indictments of politicians, things like that. Well, that person who was blue slipped by two Democratic senators from Virginia to the Republican Judiciary Committee, saying, "Yeah, we're okay with this guy, even though he's a Republican. Sure, he should be the." Which is a blue slipping, by the way, Mike, is a longstanding tradition. If the two senators of the home state of the U.S. attorney being nominated don't hand in these two blue slips going thumbs up, traditionally that nomination dies. It doesn't even progress past that point. So
Right,
these
which is
two,
why you reach out to your senators in advance of picking a nominee.
right. Well, apparently this guy, I forget the gentleman's name, found no reason to indict Comey, Letitia James, et cetera, et cetera. That did not sit well with the president, so he replaced that person. Oh, and by the way, that person sat on the vine, so all the federal judges said, "We'll appoint him," which is also part of the law, that if a person's not nominated, the temporary appointment, the federal judges get together and vote. And in this case, all the federal judges in that district unanimously voted for this guy. So he was forced to resign because he wouldn't put these indictments through. So he was
Yep.
replaced by the president's insurance attorney in from Florida, Mar-a-Lago.
Yep.
So now you have an insurance lawyer who is now in charge of prosecuting federal, for lack of a better term, federal political crimes. So the indictments against Comey and Schiff and Letitia James are all coming from this insurance lawyer, basically.
Mhm.
See, to me, a guardrail is somehow, Mike, and I can't formulate for you how, but would you agree that somehow that situation should not exist?
Absolutely, and it's one of the reasons why I think the Department of Justice needs to be more independent. I think the FBI needs to be more independent. If it were up to me, I would break up the FBI.
Sure.
I would, you know, break up the FBI into pieces, some of which doesn't need to be preserved or replicated, much of which can get spun out to the state police agencies, and all of this anti-espionage stuff. The FBI makes the case that it needs to exist to fight the international terrorism and now domestic terrorism. That sort of thing can be sent to the Department of Defense, which up until a couple of days ago, we considered to be much less politicized than the rest of the government. Maybe we'll discuss that
Right.
in next week's podcast, whether that remains true.
Yeah.
I would go so far as to suggest that administration should be appointing someone of the opposite political party or someone that is not in a political party at all. Good luck finding such a human as your attorney general. You've got to gain independence and possibly go so far as to institute a mechanism that limits the White House's political power to appoint some of these people.
Right.
And I think that that was part of the beauty of the Senate blue slip concept is you had to have at least some other human being weighing in. It wasn't much in the way of guardrails, right? But it was a little bit of something. And I think that we need a guardrail in that sense. And I think that all of our anarchist friends would agree with that, at least in principle, because I think that our anarchist friends believe more in guardrails than the power centers of government themselves.
Oh,
You just
absolutely.
guardrail this thing to death. Just
Right.
no one likes rules, but if we were putting in rules to handcuff the power of the elected
Sure.
officials, then that's all good.
Yeah.
And this is an extremely tricky situation because And again, we have to lay a lot of this problem at the feet of the Democrats and the prior administrations. The president was elected in no small part based on doing a better job of fighting crime. Okay, so that means a whole lot of people want prosecutors to have a freer hand, want to empower the Department of Justice, want to empower the FBI in a way that aligns with the president's political priors and feelings toward crime. You get where this is going.
Yes.
So there is this feeling on the right that you can't trust the left to provide the guardrails. You can't trust what they're saying in their criticism.
Right.
Not only is that because the left has done frankly, a crappy job of supporting law enforcement in general. That's an understatement, by the way. But in addition to that, the administration is not wrong about the president having been prosecuted for nothing but political reasons in the past. So when Democrats say, well, the president has this hit list of people he wants to go after, that's nothing more than retribution. Okay, first of all, I think there is something there that's more than just retribution. Some of these people may have committed crimes, but let's set aside the actual crime just for a moment. You know, I have a sneaking suspicion that Mr. Comey may actually have lied to Congress under oath, but let's set that aside. Let's set reality aside just for a moment, right? Let's suppose it is nothing but retribution. Whose fault is that? The retributor or the retributee? You know, it takes two to tango.
Sure. Yeah. I don't disagree with you because, but I think a lot of it also comes down to perception, right? And by that, I mean the following. You and I, we've said it before. The president was uh, judicially attacked, let's say, right?
Lawfared.
Lawfared for political reasons. I think we can all agree to that. However, the problem is, even if you are a vengeful sort, which the president undoubtedly is a vengeful sort, um,
Relative to other human beings, and all human beings are to a certain extent. Let me
right,
just throw that in there.
right. Oh, but Trump himself in his books has stated, like, I live for revenge. That's just been the statement of his.
Yeah, he's
I
not
don't
hiding
think
the ball here.
he's not hiding the ball. But that's part of the problem, right? When you get into office saying, the second I get into office, I'm going to throw so and so in jail. I'm going to throw so and so. I'm going to throw Comey. I'm going to throw Shifty Shift. I'm going to throw Lion Hillary, and the funny nicknames come out. It really then does open yourself up to, you're not even pretending to investigate these people. You've just decided they need to suffer the way you've suffered. Now, all the Christian values aside that the administration supposedly is trying to promote, forgiveness is not one of them, apparently, right? So when you put the combination of, hey, I don't care if you call it a hit list or not, I'm the president, I can go after these people and I will. So I think that was a tactical error, right? Because somebody in his administration said, hey, to your point, should have said, hey, boss, we'll get them. Just don't say it out loud. Don't put it out on Truth Social. Don't get on TV and say you're going after these people, because it just weakens our cases. Now anything on the fence becomes imagined as opposed to concrete. So that was the first thing. But
Yep.
then the second thing is,
And to your point,
yeah,
opens up the White House to opens up the Department of Justice to criticisms on the basis of selective prosecution, which will get you thrown out of court before you even get to your second
right.
hearing.
And then you combine it with what we've talked about in the past with, true or not, the perception that day one we were going to get all the resolutions on the Epstein case, and we haven't. And now being told that there's nothing forthcoming. When you combine that with this sort of vengeful hit list thing, now you open yourself up to, well, these are just the shiny keys here to keep you from focusing on the Epstein list. So you do have that political mess going on right now.
Or at the very least, decisions about who to prosecute and not prosecute
Right.
being heavily affected by political alignment.
Absolutely. So when you expand this a little bit further, and to build on what you said, I think a lot of Americans during the BLM riots, during the Antifa riots, during the Biden administration, and towards some parts of the first Trump administration. When Americans see cities being burned down, when we see violence in the streets tied to these groups, and then the administration says nothing here. It's a mainly a peaceful protest, right?
Right.
That falls into the category of what you said. Hey, we're sick of it. We see with our own eyes. Just like to a lot of people like me, January 6th was not a peaceful protest, right? Like, despite what the current administration may frame
Well,
that
it was
as,
mostly peaceful,
mostly peaceful, right? Just,
as
but my
all riots are. You
right,
just can't get 90% of people to be violent. You recruit the best you can, but a lot of people just are on the sidelines.
right. So the point here is, I understand the statement you made about this is a reaction to the poor handling of these situations by Democrats. But now, is it the time for retribution, as you said, to say like, okay, the president's going to be like Antifa, domestic terrorist organization, BLM, domestic terrorist organization. By the way, I'm not even sure that such a designation exists. I think it might be something the president's making up, a domestic terrorist organization.
No, of course he just made it up. I
Right,
don't think most people have a problem with that.
right,
If you told me the White House, by creating a designation and coming up with a bunch of words we've never heard shoved together in the same sentence before, could help fight crime, I think we'd be like, you know, go go get that's a hell of a powerful label. Let's do that. The problem, which I think you're about to touch on,
yeah,
is that there's no such thing
right,
9 times out of 10.
right,
Antifa is, in my view, a movement which is a very bad thing for American culture
sure,
and American society, but is not what you would call an organization, which is why the White House has included in its recent statement about going after domestic terror organizations, included, and those who finance them. Because there are organizations behind some of these movements. I think the White House probably has George Soros in mind, for
sure,
example. There are people behind some of these movements that are organized. And if the Department of Justice catches someone providing money and saying one way or another, if it gets violence, if it gets violent out there, it is what it is. I don't think there is going to be such a smoking gun. I don't think there's going to be anything out there that qualifies as incitement. But I think that that's what the White House is going to be looking for.
right. And I think that's the subject I wanted to have you talk about, Mike, both as a former police officer, understanding matters of law and order. I just wanted to ask that because we went through this cycle in the late 60s, early 70s, the Weather
Yeah.
Underground, the FNLA, the Puerto Rican uh,
Yep.
independence movement in New York.
Yep.
And if you were young, we remember they blew up Francis Tavern. They were, I think, a police precinct was targeted. Right, those were criminals. They were labeled as criminals. The words to domestic terrorists never existed. Um, and not everybody associated with those movements was branded a criminal, right? See, I think that's the danger. You brand Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. I don't know what kind of emergency powers kick in or if there are any emergency powers that kick in, but at what point does, to your point, let's say this is traced back to Soros. I don't know if it is or not. They always say it does. I don't know for sure. Let's assume it does, that he's a financier to these types of organizations, Antifa, BLM, to his support of specific DAs around the country. The most prominent one being, say, Gascon in California, in LA.
Yep.
At what point does, hey, I'm a guy with a lot of money that has political opinions, and I want to fund my political sympathizers, my political choices.
Yep.
When does that become weaponized into Soros is funding domestic terrorism? What's the line there? And to your point, we have a high bar for incitement. We have
Yeah.
Brandenburg versus Ohio, right? That's the gold standard of when something becomes incitement.
It is. And we've got other cases regarding the FCC, like Bantam Books,
Yeah,
regarding what it is that's speech that's not acceptable. Uh, we have a bar that's set very, very high. The technical answer to your question, the courts have said in brutal summary that I'm sure a lot of attorneys will be upset with me for
right,
making in such a brief remark. But the brutal, whittled down summary is, if your speech can be interpreted as getting someone to commit violence in what they call one step, the next step, after I tell you what to do, the next logical step with no interpretation necessary is to go and commit violence. So if I say, go shoot that guy, the next step is you go shoot that guy. If, on the other hand, I say, go buy a gun and a car, that doesn't necessarily imply that the next step is to go shoot that guy. That sounds to me like a gray area, but then there are even, zoom out for a moment. If I say, go hire someone who knows how to take care of business, that clearly doesn't count. We set the bar extremely high for a variety of reasons, because if you didn't, you would sweep up a whole lot of stuff you don't want to sweep up.
right,
And that's what it is that we're trying to avoid. I think most of us believe that we need to err on the side of the First Amendment.
correct,
We need to err on the side of keeping America different from the rest of the world. We need to err on the side of allowing people to do what it is they're going to do, to live their lives, to fund what they want to fund, to say what they want to say, to organize in a way that they want to organize. These are fundamental, foundational principles of our society. And remember, our government is defined by the Constitution, not the other way around. So if the Constitution says explicitly, as it does, that we need to protect Americans' rights to organize, to speak, to say whatever stupid thing that we want to say, that is bedrock stuff.
right.
The government's obligation to fight crime is one layer down. Now, that none of that is to say we don't want a government to keep us safe. As we libertarians often say, at least I know I say this all the time, we don't expect much from the government. The one thing that we want is for the government to help keep us safe.
Right.
Keep us safe from international actors and keep us safe from domestic actors. We view that as the primary
Right.
role of government is to protect our rights, and fighting crime is
Some would say it's the only role of government.
it's the only role of government is to protect
Right.
our rights, and a big one is protecting us from crime. So we need to take this very seriously, but we need to err on the side of setting the bar so high that it's very difficult for the government to do anything about it.
So when you hear stuff like that, Antifa, BLM, all these other potential organizations, are you concerned that at some point it might be, well, listen to how Gavin Newsom is talking about the president. He's calling the president a fascist. He's calling Stephen Miller a fascist. Because
Yeah.
I've seen this. He
Yep.
is calling for the murder of the president. He is calling for the assassination of Stephen Miller based off his tweet, which said Stephen Miller is a fascist. Now, I'm with you. Maybe we should not be speaking like that at this particular moment in time. But I think
That's different than a legal matter, right?
it's different than a legal matter, and
That's
it's
just
also
something that you and I and his mother should be telling him.
absolutely,
Like, sit down and shut up.
shut up. Yeah, just shut up, both politically and everything. But here's the point. Is it equally as bad on the other side where someone says, "You're a fascist," and the next response is, "You've just called for me to be murdered."
It's different, but it is just as bad because they are links in a chain that is designed to suppress free speech.
Yes, both
These
sides
are
of
all
those comments, yeah.
different links, and you need them all if you're going to effectively suppress free speech.
So in that sense, Mike, First of all, let me back up half a step. How would you handle what appears to the American public to be violence that is closely associated with political movements? For example, if you ask most Americans, you and I disagree, right? You and I would disagree with most Americans in quotes, but Antifa being a domestic terrorist organization.
Yep.
If
I,
how do we separate those and how do we legally attack those by attack I mean suppress the violence that's coming out of there?
I'm a big believer in correctly identifying problems. And this is very different from the way politicians work, right? Politicians work by using the most recent catastrophe, broadening its definition to include your own hobby horse or what you think is going to get you elected or whatever lends itself to a public sector solution so that you can look like the white knight.
Right.
We get that. But law enforcement works when, and really only when, you correctly identify the problem. Not only at a very granular level, meaning you want to go after the right guy, you want to arrest the right criminal, but also at the policy level. You
Right.
don't want to say, we have a shoplifting problem when you actually have a homelessness problem. You don't want to say, we have a, a personal domestic violence problem when you actually have a drug problem. You want to correctly identify the problem, or otherwise you're always going to just be dealing with the symptoms rather than the underlying cause. No
Hmm.
different from problem solving in any other context. I'm not saying anything that's really interesting here. For this reason, I'm really discouraged when public officials, once they're elected, they keep saying stupid things about their political opponents. The Trump administration is no different. One might argue that they're louder and better at it, but it's not like they invented this,
Sure.
right? Past administrations have continued to criticize their political opponents in sweeping and polemical ways after they are elected. So, most recent examples, the president characterizes Antifa as something that we need to stop. I, I think he's probably right about that, but he shouldn't be saying it like that today, right? If you've got an Antifa problem, you should have said so a couple of years ago. If you've got a problem with political violence, as we do today, we see an enormous spike in what appear to be politically motivated assassinations, killings, bombing, shootings. At least the victims are members of organized political forces. You don't want to be out there mislabeling what the problem is. Because when you say a lot of the recent perpetrators are parts of organized leftist or rightist political organizations, that's a swing and a miss. And it's a problem for a couple different reasons, not the least of which is that it's not true.
Right.
Number one, the vast majority of these, I'm struggling to think of a counterexample actually right now, but I'm going to keep it to the vast majority, are just crazy people.
Sure.
They're either crazy certifiably lock them up sense for being crazy, or they're crazy in the sense that they have become untethered to an ability to think through rational problem solving.
Sure.
They are not political operatives. You know, these are not people who walked off their job as a lobbyist or walked off their job as, you know, a campaigner or walked off of their job from Capitol Hill, right? And picked up a weapon and started shooting people. That's not how this has worked. These are crazy people. After the fact, we see their writings may have been politically sensitive, politically motivated, politically overlapping with certain groups. But the only real connection between these crazy people and the way that these uh, political motivations exist is through the communication from the organized groups. These communications do not come anywhere close to meeting the bar for what you would call incitement.
Right.
So when you say that they are members of organized political opposition, number one, you're wrong. Number two, because we can see you're wrong, it makes it look like you have a motivation other than trying to be correct and accurate.
Right.
Well, what motivation might that be? And here we are. And that's why you and I are nervous, I believe, is because we've got a whole lot of people on the left and on the right. Today, we're talking about the Trump administration pronouncements, but it's all over.
Right.
People characterizing political operatives on the other side as articulating things and saying things in public that lead to violence. And I have no doubt that the character of our political discourse in this country is bad for us. It's bad for our society. And one might be able to say,
Hmm.
with further research and contemplation, that the political environment that we have fostered has led in no small part to an uptick in violence. I am willing to be convinced of that.
Hmm.
I think that most of us would not be completely surprised at all if, in the fullness of time, research demonstrated that, you say enough stupid things in public, eventually someone picks up a gun, right? I don't have any counter research to shoot that theory down.
Right.
But none of that speaks to something against which we should be instituting legal recourse. None of that comes to the level of what you would call incitement. None of that is the funding of terrorism. And so we have this huge mismatch between the baseball bat and the baseball, right? You got a baseball bat and someone's throwing a frisbee. Well, you might hit it, but good luck with that. You're just using the wrong tool.
Right.
And I don't have a problem with the administration being upset about political violence. I think it would be a little weird if the administration were not upset about political violence.
Right. Right.
We all should be. But then at the same time saying, in the same week, the same month, saying, here's my list, Pammy. Can we please prosecute these people?
Yeah.
There's your frisbee.
See, I think and I appreciate what you said, because as you were talking, you think of examples depending on the environment that you would always point to. So right now it is the Trump administration, and it is like Trump versus the leftists and the leftists versus Trump in terms of who's actually speaking at any given moment. Um, it really is identity politics in reverse, right? Whereas identity politics was always, I associate with this group because I want the status associated with this group, or I want whatever is associated with the group. Now it's the opposite. In this particular case, you're saying, I'm assigning this shooter, I'm assigning this perpetrator of political violence to this group that I wanted identified with. So I would caution, say, my friends on the right, correctly, whenever there's a school shooting, you say, wait. That was a person who was off his meds, or that was a person disconnected from reality. The whole NRA isn't responsible for that person. Gun owners are not responsible for that person shooting up a school. Correctly. You and I would agree with that. So then I would caution, if you're on the right, why would you look at Charlie Kirk's assassin, and the first thing you're going to say is, he is a Satanist. He is anti-Christian. He is a fascist. He is an evil person who is trying to destroy America by drawing them away from Christianity, which is a narrative. You hear that from Turning Point
Yep.
USA. Why would you do that if you're on the right, when you've acknowledged, again, I think this falls back to the retribution versus like a guardrail type of thing. It's okay to say, I was wrong, but I'm not going to further the cycle of bad behavior. I'm not going to further the cycle of retribution.
Yep. And I think a piece of it is because the politics are just too good to resist.
Right.
And I think that there's a level of discipline that politicians aren't used to, especially in the Trump administration. And it's a special kind of discipline. It's a discipline that says, don't say certain things, even if they're true.
Okay.
So if you believe that Charlie Kirk's assassin was motivated by all these political things, uh, of which I could be largely convinced,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
He's got all these political things rolling around in his head. He had said to people he hates Charlie Kirk, and he wanted to stand up for trans rights. I'm sure we don't have written evidence of that, but he was in a relationship with a trans person, and Kirk said disparaging things about the trans lifestyle. So we're adding 2 and 2 to get 4. And we're wondering whether, we need to be careful because there's only 3.5, but,
Sure.
logic suggests that there's some there. Okay, we all get that. Notwithstanding all of that, you don't need to say it's a leftist problem.
Correct.
Now, this is going to be a weird thing, but work with me here.
I'll try.
Even if it's true that it's a leftist problem, even if it's true that 90 out of the last 100 apparently politically motivated mass killings or high profile assassinations have been committed by people whose beliefs align with political beliefs on the left. Let's say that that's true just for a moment. There's 2 problems with saying it out loud. One is that it doesn't help you solve the problem. If the problem is that we have too much political violence, right? It doesn't help you to say, when you're standing on the right, it's a problem on the left. That is an operational issue. At the leadership level, you've got to be the one saying, political violence is bad. We all need to do something about it. Okay, what do we need to do about it? That's at the operational level. The Department of Justice and the FBI, state law enforcement agencies, and local law enforcement agencies need to identify the problems with which they need to grapple. They may have local chapters of weird left-wing organizations, local
Right.
chapters of weird right-wing organizations. They may have churches, temples, synagogues. They may have KKK chapters. They may have, anarcho-capitalist economists. They may have chapters for organizations of which I am a member, and someone interprets one chapter or another as being a problem. Law enforcement needs to be sensitive to that. That is not something you should be articulating at the leadership level. It misguides your law enforcement agencies, and it makes it appear to the American population as though this is a political phenomenon. And I do not believe it is a political phenomenon. Even if the motivation is most proximately political. And by that, what I mean is, look, we've had right and left hate each other's guts for 250 years in this country. Now we have a huge violence problem. What changed?
Right.
What changed? You're telling me the leftists became more left or the righties became more right? I don't think so. I don't think so. So to say all of a sudden, it's the leftist philosophy that's the problem, I think is a misfire, even if you had the data to back up the idea that most of the killers are motivated by philosophies that coincide with people on the left. And I would say that about left or right.
Sure.
Now, and this is a secondary, I realize this is a subtle distinction, but I think that it's an important one. And until we have leadership that is willing to impose upon themselves a level of discipline that keeps them from saying things, even if they believe them to be true, you are not going to get this cyclical tit for tat expanding gap between the two sides under control.
Right. I think that's a great point. And I'm going to say it's a great point to end the show on, because I think it's something to think about. But I will throw in, we do have the benefit of history in this country. We had the same type of political violence at the turn of the 20th century with the so-called anarchists in this country, with kidnappings and fire bombings and things like that. More recently, we had the late 60s, early 70s political violence when we had the MLK, RFK assassinations, all the political, aggressive, violent political groups. Like we said, the Weather Underground, the FNLA, was it the Symbionese Army, Liberation
Yep.
Army, the SLA with Patty Hearst? We have seen those.
Boy, that's
And
going back. Kids, ask your parents about Patty Hearst. That's a good story.
that's a good story.
I mean, it's a bad story, but it's an interesting story.
Well, it's where we got the Stockholm syndrome phrase popularized
Absolutely.
by.
We all learned about the Stockholm syndrome because of the Patty Hearst story.
And my point with those, Mike, is we do have some history we could try to learn from. What worked in those cases? What didn't work? What drew a further wedge into the country? What healed the wounds? I think we can look at those and try to draw something from that. But I think your point is a valid one. I think
I
it's
agree with you, and for that reason, I would offer up the Mangione assassination of the insurance executive, Brian Thompson, as a more important example of what we need to worry about in this country than the more overt political assassinations. And the reason I say that is because I think that there is an important political movement that fosters violence, but I would be extremely careful against characterizing that as being on the left, on the political left. It is a Marxist concept, right? That he was embroiled in, but really didn't have much to do with the Democratic Party.
Mm.
It was really, and you piqued my interest when you say the anarchists 120 years ago. Really fascinating example, by the way, which a lot of people blame on triggering the First World War 15 years later, right?
right.
The philosophy behind this asshole Mangione is a really important one and worth teasing out at some point. The idea that people with power per se are the problem.
They're inherently evil in that view, in that worldview.
It leaves open to violence people on the right, people on the left, people in the political sphere, people in the corporate sphere. You see where I'm going?
Yeah.
And to characterize all this as being on one side or the other of the political spectrum, I think is amiss.
It is. It is. Mike, we may have gotten a couple of subjects for our next couple of episodes at the closing of this show, I think. But I thought it was an interesting episode. Certainly, if you guys out there have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section on YouTube, Rumble, X, wherever you may see this podcast. Until next time, we'll have something additionally interesting to talk about. For my co-host and friend, Mr. Mike Termat, this has been Big John. Until next Thursday, when you catch us again, peace, everyone.